With billions of dollars in military and economic help on the line, what happens if Trump decides to cut off aid to Ukraine? This wouldn't just hurt Ukraine, it could shake up entire economies, weaken alliances, and make Eastern Europe more unstable. For many countries, U.S. aid has been a shield against Russian aggression, keeping the region balanced. But if that support disappears, allies might be forced to spend more on defense, rethink their strategies, or even question their alliances. As of February 2025, the world is watching closely to see where U.S. foreign policy is headed. Today, we're listing 10 countries that could be greatly impacted if the U.S. cuts or stops Ukraine aid. Could this change the balance of power worldwide? Let's dive in. A new report from the RAM Corporation warns that stopping aid could lead to more wars, economic crashes, and rising tensions. But what do you think? Should the U.S. cut off aid to Ukraine or keep supporting it? Let me know in the comments. Before we start, hit like, subscribe, and stay till the end. Let's go. Number 10, Germany. From the very start of the war, Germany has been one of Ukraine's strongest allies, sending billions of euros in military aid, weapons, and humanitarian support. But what if the U.S. pulls back its funding? Germany would have to step up even more, putting a huge strain on its economy and military resources. Reports say Germany has already sent over $17 billion in aid. If the U.S. stops leading, Germany might be forced to spend even more, which could hurt its economy. Some EU countries don't want to spend extra money on Ukraine, so Germany could end up carrying most of the burden. This could divide German politics, with some leaders arguing that the country has already done more than enough. Germany has also been dealing with over 1.1 million Ukrainian refugees, which has stretched social services, housing, and infrastructure to the limit. If Ukraine weakens, another wave of refugees could cause even more economic problems. Before the war, Germany relied heavily on Russian energy. Now, it has had to change its energy policies fast to keep up with shifting global politics. Meanwhile, Russia is pushing Germany to spend even more on defense, and some experts warn that Germany is still falling behind NATO's military goals. If the U.S. cuts back its help, Germany may have no choice but to take on a leadership role in Europe's defense, whether it's ready or not. Number 9, Poland. Poland has already spent over $4 billion to help Ukraine with weapons, military aid, and humanitarian support. This number has kept rising for 2 years, making Poland one of Ukraine's strongest allies. But what if the U.S. pulls back its support? Poland might have to take on an even heavier financial and military burden, leading to economic struggles and rising tensions at home. Security is another big worry. If U.S. aid to Ukraine slows down, Eastern Europe could become more unstable, forcing Poland to spend even more on its military. The country has already welcomed millions of Ukrainian refugees, putting pressure on housing, schools, and hospitals. With Poland sharing a 310-mile border with Ukraine, it has always seen Russia as a serious threat. If Ukraine weakens, another wave of refugees could make Poland's challenges even worse. The Polish government has questioned whether the EU's financial aid is enough to handle these growing problems. Poland might push NATO and the EU to do more, but without the US's deep involvement, Europe may struggle to fill the gap. Even though Poland is trying to strengthen its military, it still relies heavily on U.S. intelligence, advanced weapons, and logistical support. If U.S. aid to Ukraine stops, Poland could face greater military risks and serious economic trouble. Number 8, France. France has become one of Ukraine's strongest supporters, providing military aid, humanitarian help, and diplomatic backing. But what if the U.S. stops funding Ukraine? France might have to step in even more, putting huge pressure on its military budget and political stability. Reports say France has already sent over $4 billion in aid, but replacing U.S. funding would require a major shift in policy. President Emmanuel Macron has been a strong ally of Ukraine, but French citizens are starting to question if they should keep paying the price. With high inflation, ongoing protests over pension reforms, and economic struggles, many are worried that sending more money and weapons could make things worse at home. Some fear that taking on extra responsibilities could lead to instability in France itself. At the same time, if the US steps back, France might have to rethink its military role in NATO. Macron has pushed for a stronger European defense, but without US leadership, can Europe afford it? France has also helped house Ukrainian refugees and rebuild infrastructure. But without US support, Ukraine's recovery could slow down, leaving France and Europe struggling to pick up the pieces. With growing doubts at home, political tensions rising, and economic strain increasing, France may soon have to make a tough decision. How much more can it really give? Number 7. United Kingdom. The UK has been one of Ukraine's strongest allies, providing high-tech weapons, military training, and intelligence support. But what happens if the US stops funding Ukraine? The UK might have to step up even more, but with its own financial struggles, that could be a huge problem. Reports say the UK has already spent over $6.5 billion on Ukraine. If it keeps sending money and weapons, other important areas like healthcare, education, and the economy might suffer. British military officials warn that if US aid stops, Ukraine's defenses could collapse, forcing Europe to step in unprepared. The UK has sent tanks, long-range missiles, and intelligence. But can it replace the billions lost if the US pulls out? Ukraine might run out of weapons fast, forcing the UK to rethink its support. At home, this is causing divisions. Some say the UK should focus on fixing its own economy, especially with rising inflation and energy costs. Many Brits already feel the UK has done enough, according to BBC News. Beyond money, the UK has worked closely with NATO and the US on defense and intelligence. A sudden US withdrawal could shake up everything, forcing the UK to change its military and diplomatic strategies. If that happens, Ukraine could lose one of its most powerful allies, leaving it even more exposed to danger. The UK isn't likely to abandon Ukraine, but without US support, can it keep up the fight? Number 6. Lithuania. Since the war began, Lithuania has been one of Ukraine's loudest supporters, providing military aid, training, and humanitarian assistance. But if the US cuts its funding, Lithuania could face a serious dilemma. According to the Baltic Times, the threat of Russian aggression is still very real, and without strong US backing, Lithuania may have to pour even more money into its defense. The country has already pushed its military budget to a record high, but will that be enough if the US pulls back? Lithuania and the other Baltic states depend heavily on NATO protection, especially the US military presence. If America steps away, NATO's response to a Russian threat could become uncertain, leaving Lithuania feeling more vulnerable than ever. This could push the country to demand stronger security promises from European allies. But security isn't the only concern. Lithuania has also welcomed thousands of Ukrainian refugees, and this is stretching public services and the housing market to the limit. If the war drags on with less US support, Lithuania might have no choice but to cut financial aid for refugees. Beyond security, Lithuania's economy is deeply linked to Ukraine. If Ukraine's economy collapses, Lithuanian businesses could suffer huge losses. With the US stepping back, Lithuania may have to completely rethink its foreign policy and turn to the EU and regional allies to stay protected. Can this small Baltic nation withstand the storm, or will it be forced to make painful sacrifices? Number 5. Canada. Canada is facing a tough situation. If the US reduces its support for Ukraine, Canada will have to rethink its entire defense strategy. The US plays a major role in NATO, handling intelligence, military planning, and logistics, so any shift in Washington's focus could put Canada under intense pressure. Global tensions are rising, with threats in the Arctic and Indo-Pacific, making defense decisions even more complex. Since the war began, Canada has given over $9 billion in military, economic, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine, but making up for lost US funding would be nearly impossible. Experts warn this could seriously weaken Ukraine's fight. Ottawa might have to redirect funds away from Ukraine, which could trigger backlash at home. While many Canadians support helping Ukraine, frustration is growing. People are demanding the government focus on problems like housing and healthcare, especially as inflation soars. Economic struggles are already hitting hard, and some politicians might push Canada to cut spending on Ukraine altogether. Another huge challenge is refugees. Over 250,000 Ukrainians have arrived in Canada since 2022. If the war worsens, even more will come, stretching social services and public resources to the limit. If the US pulls back, Canada will have to make some of its toughest decisions yet. Can it continue supporting Ukraine without America leading the way? Number 4, Estonia. Estonia has been one of Ukraine's loudest supporters, promising to spend a big chunk of its budget on military aid if the US pulls back. But here's the scary part. Estonia sits right next to Russia, a country it has feared for years. The risk of an attack or destabilization could skyrocket if Ukraine weakens. According to the Estonian Ministry of Defense, the country has already spent over $500 million on Ukrainian aid, a huge amount for such a small nation. But that's not the only problem. If Ukraine falls, Russia could feel bold enough to start causing trouble in the Baltic states. Estonia and its neighbors rely on NATO's protection. But if the US weakens its leadership, that shield could crack. Estonia might have no choice but to spend more money on defense and deepen its ties with Europe. And it's not just about military power. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian refugees now live in Estonia, putting stress on housing, schools, and hospitals. According to EUR News, Estonia has already suffered multiple Russian cyber attacks. And if Ukraine loses US backing, these attacks could become even more dangerous. Estonia's trade, energy, and cybersecurity are all tied to Ukraine. And without strong American leadership, Estonia's future looks more uncertain than ever. Number 3, Japan. Japan has been one of Ukraine's strongest supporters outside of Europe, providing financial aid, non-lethal military help, and strict sanctions against Russia. But if the US pulls back its support, Japan could face a serious dilemma. According to Japan Times, Tokyo will have to juggle its loyalty to Ukraine, its alliance with the West, and its growing security concerns with China and North Korea. With tensions already rising in Asia, this could put Japan in a very tough spot. Japan has already committed over $7 billion to Ukraine, but continuing that level of support without US leadership would be much harder. Tokyo knows that if Ukraine weakens, authoritarian regimes could feel emboldened, not just in Europe, but across the world, including Asia. That's why Japan has been strengthening its military ties with the US and NATO. However, this raises a big problem. Japan has long been hesitant to increase its defense budget. But with the world becoming more unstable, can it afford to stay the same? Japan's economy is already struggling with rising energy costs and supply chain disruptions. More chaos in Eastern Europe could drive up inflation and worsen trade imbalances. If Washington changes its stance, Japan's entire security strategy in the Indo-Pacific could be shaken. Some experts believe Japan might have to expand its own military power, a move that could spark huge political debates at home. If the US drastically cuts support to Ukraine, Japan will face a difficult foreign policy decision. Should it continue backing Ukraine or shift its focus entirely to protecting its own region? Number 2, Taiwan. Taiwan may not be directly involved in the war in Ukraine, but it is watching every move, and so is China. If the US pulls back its support for Ukraine, it could send a dangerous message to the world. According to the South China Morning Post, many fear this could signal that America is stepping away from its global promises, leaving Taiwan more vulnerable than ever to a Chinese attack. Taiwanese leaders believe that how the US handles Ukraine will shape future conflicts. If Washington shows weakness or hesitation, it could embolden China to make a bold move against Taiwan, directly testing US commitment. And let's be clear, China has already increased military drills near Taiwan's borders, watching how far they can push before facing resistance. Despite the looming threat, Taiwan has been a strong supporter of Ukraine, providing financial aid, humanitarian relief, and even crucial semiconductor technology. But when it comes to defense, Taiwan relies heavily on the US for weapons, intelligence, and military coordination. If the US shifts focus, Taiwan may have to drastically boost its own military power. The big question is, if America steps back from Ukraine, Will it do the same for Taiwan? Number 1, Ukraine. If the US cuts aid to Ukraine, the impact would be immediate and devastating. One of the biggest problems? A critical shortage of weapons and ammunition. Since the war began, Ukraine has depended on billions of dollars in military and economic support from the US. Without it, everything changes. Right now, US funding provides high-tech weapons, intelligence, and direct financial help that keep Ukraine's defense alive. Ukrainian forces have relied on Patriot missile systems, high-mobility artillery rocket system, and Abrams tanks to hold their ground. But what happens if that support vanishes? Ukraine could lose more territory simply because it can't keep up the fight. And it's not just the battlefield. Ukraine's entire economy is at risk. Billions have gone into paying government salaries, fixing infrastructure, and keeping the lights on. If the money stops, Ukraine could face total financial collapse, struggling to find new funding from Europe or private investors. This isn't just about Ukraine. Poland, Germany, and the Baltic states could face bigger security threats. Even Japan and Taiwan might see this as a sign that US commitment is fading. Is this the start of a global power shift? What do you think? Should the US keep supporting Ukraine, or should Europe step up? Comment below, like, and subscribe for more updates.